Okay, now let's have some special coverage on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict issue. We'll have a couple of guests. We'll have Press TV correspondent in Gaza City, Ashraf Shannon, who's been covering this for us live in the past week. Marcus Papadopoulos, author and historian, is also joining us from London. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Let's go to Gaza City. Ashraf, what's the latest?
Yes, Behruz, Israeli regime continues to claim more Palestinian lives. As earlier, there were over 200 deaths in Gaza as a result of the ongoing onslaught since last Monday. Minutes ago, we learned from eyewitnesses, not from the Ministry of Health, from eyewitnesses, from different eyewitnesses, that an Israeli warplane attacked a car driving, a civilian car driving behind the Shifa hospital not far from here in the west of Gaza City, saying at least 2 people have lost their lives in that recent Israeli attack on that civilian car in Gaza City. Meanwhile, we're standing here in front of one of the buildings that were bombed during the recent attacks on the Gaza Strip. What you see right now is what U.S. taxpayers' money is paying for. Israeli fighter jets use, the Israeli Air Force uses American-made weapons, American-made fighter jets to kill and maim Palestinians. And this is just a simple example of what such American-made weapons have been doing to Palestinians. And over the last days, Israeli forces have been using bunker buster smart bombs, according to experts, that cause havoc to buildings and surrounding areas of the bombarded buildings, and also cause a seismic effect in the ground everywhere these rockets are launched at. Israel has destroyed hundreds of buildings in Gaza since last Monday. Some of them completely, some of them partially, but even the ones that are partially destroyed, Israel says that they warn the owners of the residents, even through phone calls or firing a little rocket, a small rocket. And there is nothing called a small rocket in the military. That rocket kills people and have killed people before. They hit a building, and after that, they use F-35 or F-16 fighter jets to bomb it completely. But in many occasions, they do not call, they do not warn, they just bomb the buildings, like what happened yesterday, early yesterday, for 2 families, 2 buildings in Gaza, where scores of people, including women and children and elderly people, were killed. And the day before, at a Shati refugee camp, where 10 members of the same family, all children and women, were killed.
Okay, and Ashraf, I wonder if that rescue operation is still going on under that rubble yesterday. Every hour, unfortunately, we're getting some updates with the casualties rising. Have the rescue workers lost hope?
It's not their. There's no way for them to lose hope. Even if they lose hope, the families of those who are under the rubble cannot lose hope. I mean, initially when the bombing happened, people used their bare hands to try and find loved ones, and even rescue workers and the civil defense team were doing that to try and find people. Sorry. The situation is extremely dangerous, because sometimes even when you look for victims under the rubble, you might have end up with a UXO, an unexploded ordnance.
Right.
And that has happened many times in recent years.
Exactly. Okay, thank you for that. Let's go now to London. We also have author and historian Marcus Papadopoulos. Marcus, but let's have your assessment of the situation. And are you kind of uh, being hopeful because that the world is awakening to see, given the rallies in support of the Palestinians, every corner of the world, even in Europe and America?
Well, it is times like these when placing the futility of placing faith in the United Nations resonates with me even more profoundly. Now, don't misunderstand my words. I am a firm supporter of the concept behind the United Nations. However, what we have seen since the establishment of the United Nations are certain countries, and I am referring principally to the two permanent member states, the United States of America and Great Britain, who have unashamedly abused their positions. Because here we have a great many civilians who have been massacred by one of the most major of military powers in the world. I'm talking about the Israeli war machine having massacred many Palestinian civilians, including scores of children and women. And yet, despite the bloodshed, despite the utter barbarity that the world is witness to, America is obstructing the emergence of a proper and meaningful discussion at the United Nations Security Council on Israel's behavior. So that is why I question, I wonder about the very existence of the United Nations. Is the existence of the United Nations futile? And it pains me to have to say yes, because it is not just the suffering of the Palestinians that the United Nations has utterly failed to prevent. The United Nations failed to prevent the Western powers, again, I'm talking about America and Britain, from having started numerous conflicts in the last 30 years. And those numerous conflicts have caused terrible human suffering, from the civil wars in the former Yugoslavia, which the Americans and the British started, to the invasion, illegal criminal invasion of Iraq, to the criminal intervention of NATO in Libya, which has caused Libya to be a failed state, to the support of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, which Washington and London provided, along with the ongoing suffering over decades now of the Palestinian people.
That's right.
So the United Nations clearly is not fulfilling the reasons it was set up for. And why? Because unfortunately, in the minds of policymakers in Washington and London, might is right.
Exactly.
Yes, they profess in public to support
Marcus, let's take a look at
practice they don't.
Marcus, let's also consider another aspect. I just ask you about what you think this movement on the part of people across the planet would end up in. You see, you never saw anything like this so far. It's unprecedented. People across the planet are taking out to the streets and they're condemning Israel. They're standing by the Palestinian people.
There's no question about it, and certainly no doubt in my mind that more and more people in all four corners of the world are becoming increasingly aware of the savage treatment which is given to the Palestinians by the Israelis. And I believe that that is on account of news channels like Press TV and also various social media platforms. So that is certainly something which I personally am encouraged about. I have been observing the disgusting treatment of the Palestinians at the hands of Israel for many, many years. And it is very clear that there are more people, certainly in my country, Britain, who are now aware and who are extremely angry at the plight of the Palestinians and the indifference of the British government and the American government. But, and I'm afraid to say, but, again, the old maxim which Washington and London adhere to, and of course which Tel Aviv adheres to, might is right. Even though you can have tens of millions of ordinary men and women across the world who are completely sympathetic to the Palestinians, is that going to force a change of foreign policy in London and Washington? I'm sorry to have to say, no. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be protests in support of the Palestinians. Yes, we have to keep on relaying the truth, the reality, the plight to more and more people about what Palestinian men, women, children and old people have to go through on a daily basis, not just in the last 2 weeks, at the hands of the Israelis. But ultimately, if we really want to help the Palestinians, we have to see Iran grow stronger and stronger in terms of its influence and power in the Middle East, and we have to see Russia grow stronger and stronger in terms of its influence and power in the Middle East. Washington and London, I assure you, do not care about public opinion, but they do care when they see two countries, principally Russia and Iran, growing in stature in the Middle East.
Okay, thank you very much for your insight and contribution. We had Ashraf Shannon, Press TV correspondent in Gaza City with us, and Marcus Papadopoulos, author and historian who joined us from London with his thoughts and contribution.